So I've just hit record, everybody, and today what we're going to do is we're going to walk through financial sustainability. And in this particular session, what we'll do is, talk through all things related to financial sustainability. And as a part of that exercise, we are going to talk in particular about funding programs and what is valuable in this process for us from a funding program perspective. This is an interesting one in my mind because on one level, in some respects, it feels like the easiest thing to contribute to financial sustainability. And the reason is because, all entrepreneurs at some point in time feel like they need to raise money. However, there is this sense of how do we create a scenario where we feel confident to do it, because it is a bit of a skill to deliver this type of content. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk through this topic today. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to roll through some material. As always, just keep yourself on mute if you are not speaking. That will help to keep the line clear. In addition to that, don't be shy to take a peek at everybody. Make sure that you know all who are on this particular call. And in terms of questions, from time to time, I will ask you to come off of mute to answer a question. But if you're not able to come off of mute, then definitely do type it into chat, and I will gladly respond to your question there. So just giving you guys a bit of context there, which is great. And I didn't notice any questions in Slack today, but I do want to highlight that if you guys have any questions at any time about financial sustainability, and this could be as broad as we don't know what to do next, all the way to can we get some specific feedback on a proposal, please do share those questions in Slack so that we have an opportunity to respond, whether it's myself or Liv or Sana. We all have an opportunity to kind of speak into that. And everybody gets, of course, a chance to learn from those questions as well. So just keep that in mind. Does anybody want to share any updates about how you're doing on financial sustainability, or any updates on progress that you've made on revenue? Does anybody want to share anything at this stage of the game? And you can pop it in chat, or you can come off of mute. But would love to hear how you guys are doing.
Hey Keith, Junaid here.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. So just a small update on the serendipity front. So we had a good conversation with the potential sponsors in Singapore, and hopefully today they will get back to us. I think a point worthy of sharing is that we have asked for, there's a certain, kind of a monetary sponsorship element to it as well, definitely. But since it is a group of very well-connected people in Singapore, so we are also asking them to consider how, and we've shared our entire budget with them, how some of the costs can be reduced. So we knew some of the people who were in the hospitality business, so perhaps how, they can help us with hosting of events and all of that. So let's see how it comes back. But the pitch was a combination of, hard cash versus, as well as, anything that brings the cost down.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, that's great. And to that end, when you were speaking about sponsors, were they all corporate sponsors? Were there any donors in those conversations?
So essentially a combination, because it's a consortium of people who are diaspora expats living in Singapore. Yep. So some of the people are people who are business owners themselves, but then there are people who are part of in the decision making of certain agencies such as the Asian Development Bank and others. So it's a combination of groups. So I think what they can do in facilitating some kind of cost taken care of versus that it's yet to be seen. But it was a combination of blend of people like that.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, it's fantastic. Perfect. Thanks for sharing that. Anybody else want to share? All right. Okay, good. Well, why don't we keep going? Again, as always, folks, don't be shy to put any questions or comments into the group chat, and happy to respond to those. So again, continue to work on your financial sustainability canvas. We have been talking about this since the very beginning of this theme. Would love to have you share your financial sustainability canvas with myself and Liv and Sana. We will gladly give you feedback on it and give you some suggestions. Do also share it with the partner that you are working with actively to make sure that you're getting high quality feedback as well. So let's talk a little bit about investment readiness. And what I mean by investment readiness, of course, is helping companies to raise whatever funding is needed to help them in their business. And importantly, as well as a part of that journey, is helping them understand where where the line is for them. Are they ready to raise money? Are they not? What type of money is good for them or not, as the case may be? And so really that's kind of the focal point. I did have a question pop in, and that question is there a template for the sustainability canvas? I am pretty sure there is one at the top of the Slack channel feed. However, I will confirm that at the end of this session today. So hopefully we'll have that in place. But thanks for that question. So as I said at the beginning of this session, fundraising support is something that everybody needs. And you can see I put needs in quotes because most entrepreneurs, if you give them the chance, they will ask for that support. They will say, hey, I need to raise money. They may or may not actually need to raise money. And that's a part of the process that we can go through as support organizations to help them first identify, do they really need to raise money? And then if so, what and how? And so the starting point in this process for you as an organization is to think a little bit about these 5 steps. So first is to build some capability for yourself in terms of your own training and your own experience to ensure that you actually have the kind of wisdom and knowledge to be able to support entrepreneurs to raise money in whatever form that is. The other key piece, of course, is to start to build a community of investors. What I will say is that this is not always the case for every organization, because for some of us, it is important to note that we do have more potential for angel investors in some communities than in others. But generally speaking, if there is an opportunity to start to develop an investor community, it would happen second on your list. The third component is to build a support system. Support system of those people who will also help organizations to raise money. Here I have given 2 examples. One is legal and accounting. And there are other support systems in certain places helping to build relationships with organizations like GoFundMe or Indiegogo or Kickstarter would be organizations that you can look at. I mean, obviously also looking at donors and funders who will directly invest in startups and micro enterprises is also very much an option. Will, thanks for popping in the financial sustainability canvas in Slack. That's fantastic, thank you. And so then step number 4 is to start to build linkages with global accelerators and linkages with global investors. So that tends to come up next in the priority sequence. And as a part of that process, it is important to note that there are global accelerators that will support a very diverse range of startups, like everything from patents pending high tech through to, certain types of impact micro enterprise. So I'm going to pause there, see if anybody has any questions or anything to add, and Liv and Will, I would include you in on that. So far, so good. Great. Again, keep popping questions in the Slack.
Liv here. Can you hear me, Keith?
Loud and clear. Thanks, Liv.
Just one thing I'd add is if you haven't done this before, it takes a lot longer than the entrepreneur involved believes that it will. Assessing where they're at, trying to find the right investor or other pathway to sustainability. So set expectations early that this is a process that might take many months and even a couple of years.
Yeah, I think you have really, raised an important part, which is, and this is my perspective, it always takes longer, as Liv, you well note. And I think the other piece is that not only does it always take longer than expected, but I also find as well that it can often ultimately mean that not only does it take longer, and we often say twice as long as you think, but the other key piece is that you often need more money than you think. And this especially starts to elevate when you are trying to build a bigger business, and if you're trying to build a technology business or a technology-enabled business. So it's kind of like, the saying that we have is it takes twice as long and you'll end up needing twice as much money. And so Liv, I think, point well taken on that. Yeah. Any other questions or comments, folks? Cool. Well, why don't we keep going? So the 5 key places where we can support, and this is going to start to dive into financial sustainability for ourselves. Chuli asked the question, do I understand it correctly? This module is about funding for the incubator accelerator. The answer to that is no. This session is actually on the opportunity for us as incubators and accelerators to deliver funding training to entrepreneurs and have that contribute to our own financial sustainability. So in other words, we provide funding training and support, and we can get funded to do that ourselves. And so, yeah, so thanks for asking that question. That's good clarification. Cool. So with that in mind, the opportunities that we have to provide this support is through training, tools, advisory services, introductions, and kind of making it work for you. So in other words, like what other sort of custom pieces might be relevant in your particular marketplace. And then there is a bonus that comes along with that, which is possibly for some of you the ability to actually receive a return on an investment if you take a percentage of ownership in a business. So those are kind of the 5 key areas that we can provide support in and get funding to do. So the first one around training is that we can train them up on tools, advisory services, and custom support. And the important part is our entrepreneurs need to be ready, especially for anyone who is pitching investors. Investors really will only give an entrepreneur one chance to make a pitch. And if they do it right, then they have they have an opportunity to then get that investment. But if they don't get it right, then they really won't get another chance at it. So that's really an important part in this mix. So what we want to do is we want to provide some tools and advisory services and custom support. And this piece here, which is called the training path, is a path that we at Spring have laid out over the last 5 years, and we find it's a very effective process. So what you will see is that there is some pre-work that entrepreneurs can go through. So things like incubation, customer discovery, sometimes acceleration, and so the classic programs that all of us run. But at a certain point in time, there is some number of our companies that are actually ready to raise money. And so what we do is we walk through a 5-step process, which is funding foundation, followed by pitch development, followed by valuation, followed by due diligence, followed by negotiation. So very quickly, funding foundation is really, just exactly as it sounds, funding 101. How do you raise money? What are the potential different sources of funding, from loans and grants to revenue to investment, different types of investment, etc. Pitch development is basically how you prepare to pitch for those different types of money, whether it is an investor or a bank loan or a grant, but how do you prepare for that process? The third one is valuation. This could be valuation of a project if it's a donor. It could also be valuation of the business and pitching an investor. Due diligence is just, frankly, the fancy investor term for homework, right? So it's the homework that that the funder will do on the organization, like our entrepreneurs, in order to have confidence to give the money. And of course, the last piece is negotiation. Underneath the line, we do have some bonus training that we provide from time to time, depending on the nature of the ecosystem. So one is around budgeting and forecasting and providing some core financial literacy. The second one is crowdfunding, and this is anywhere where crowdfunding is both relevant and legal, like it's actually possible to do it. The third one is ICOs, or initial coin offerings, and that obviously serves a subset of the market, but for some of you, you might be bumping into it. Under pitch development, there definitely is pitch practice, especially for those who are pursuing investors. And then item number 4, you can see we have something called 4A, round mechanics. And round mechanics is really just going into some of the math and some of the additional details as you raise money for a business. So these are, in effect, 5 core workshops with 5 supporting workshops that could be delivered into your community. And so when I talk about that, it is important to note that in most ecosystems, someone is usually willing to pay you to do this. And in our case at Spring, we have seen scenarios where donors and sponsors will actually and actively support the delivery of workshops like this for the ecosystem to help people to become empowered, to know how to raise money and to do it well. In other cases, we see ecosystems where they are developed enough that entrepreneurs themselves are willing to pay for this training, either in part or in whole. And there's a funny piece of entrepreneur psychology that exists where often for most of us, our entrepreneurs don't pay anything for our workshops and for our programs. But this is one thing that often entrepreneurs, especially those who are post-launch and in revenue, they will actually gladly spend money to learn how to raise money well. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pause there and see if anybody has any questions or topics on this particular component of funding, which is for all of us to make money through funding training. So any questions on funding training and whether or not it's a fit for your ecosystem or whether or not it's the model makes sense? And I'll just wait for a second to see if anybody pops anything into chat or comes off mute.
Hi, Keith.
Hey, Zareen, how are you?
I'm good. Yeah, so we've constantly like debated the fact that like should we be like charging our alumni, because like I think the incubators, because we work with like mostly either entrepreneurs who are just fresh out of college or in college and are basically just working on their idea. So it's absolutely doesn't make sense even to like work with them on investment readiness, because they're so at an idea stage. So we usually just work with them on like idea development. They're actually just getting their prototype ready. But we have debated, it's like we want to get our alumni engaged. So they generally we've gotten like a mixed response. Like we've started this like last month actually. Like just survey after our monitoring and evaluation survey, that like would they be interested in some like doing things like that. But then like there's a lot of these incubators have already been going to other like incubators and accelerators. So people who have been going to incubators, they are still interested, because because getting funding is just a constant struggle here in this ecosystem. But then there are organizations and there are students who have now like who were then waiting, like had worked on their idea and never got funding, so sort of got like disappointed. And they were like, if you like, there was also like responses like, if you had incubated us, then you should do this for free. So there's also this attitude that somewhat like people have here. So that's also like a challenge. Like, how do you tell them, like, if we incubate, like, help them in their idea development, but not necessarily, it's not going to be like a lifelong process.
Yeah, I think, great sharing. You're, I think, 100% right that when you're working with university students, generally speaking, about the only thing you would deliver would be either number one, funding foundation, or 1B, which is crowdfunding. That's probably about the extent of it. And the reason, of course, is because sometimes as they're developing their idea, they're starting to think about like, how do I raise money to go launch this thing? And so that funding foundation and the crowdfunding options start to come into play. But you would do that as a value add for those students. And if you could, you would, get some money from donors or sponsors to do it. With alumni, I actually really like the fact that you guys are looking at engaging with alumni to get them to continue to, be a part of the process and to continue to provide support to them. Now, yes, there is a psychology of, what should I get for free versus what I should get for pay. And I think the important part is that what we tend to do at Spring, and I'm definitely curious to hear how some of the rest of you would consider doing this, and Liv and Will can chime in as well. But for us, what we would do is we would do things like a funding foundation workshop or some of the basic workshops where we actually seek donor and donor funding or corporate sponsor funding for these basic workshops. So maybe the path for you is to get a donor or a sponsor to fund these types of workshops, which are lighter workshops, often 2 hours in duration. And then that becomes kind of alumni benefit, where they say, oh, I'm an alumni and I should get this for free. But then if they realize that after some of these workshops, they need more help, then I think there could be an opportunity for you to actually say, great, I've given you all of this extra stuff as an alumni benefit funded by, donor X or sponsor X. But now what you're asking for is a much deeper involvement. And so that would be something I would have to charge for. So that could be definitely an option to go through it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Keith.
Yeah, it's a great question. Fantastic. Thank you.
So Keith, it's Olivia here. I'll just tip in there. What we find is really there's three pathways for funding. Either the enterprise itself pays, we also have what we call an ecosystem player, and they're peak bodies, corporates, not-for-profits, who it's core to who they are that they want to see a change in a certain area, and they want to see it at scale. So they're usually interested in investment because that's the scaling stage. So we find ecosystem customers will pay, and then there's the investor. The investor may pay for the impact assessment readiness and preparing for investment. So they're sort of the three areas that we find, and every enterprise is different.
Mm-hmm. So Liv, maybe just to clarify for everyone, what you're kind of sharing there is you will have an ecosystem player, so let's call it a corporate or a nonprofit. Are they paying for the entrepreneurs to take the training? Is that what you're referring to? Or are they paying for themselves to take the training?
No, they're paying for the entrepreneur and the enterprise to be skilled up and to become self-assessing. And for us, so we aren't yet at a stage where we run workshops in these things, but that's a great idea that I'm learning today. At the moment, we tend to take each investment through on its own.
Yep.
Through those, probably often we come in at step 3, although if we haven't worked with them before, we come in earlier. And we'll find that usually we ask the entrepreneurs to pay something, pretty much always, because we find that their response isn't as good if they don't have financial skin in the game. And then usually, often there's another either ecosystem player or the investor is also pre-investing in this early stage as the entrepreneur for the first time understands their valuation, the due diligence process, and then actually negotiating the offer.
Mm-hmm. So Liv, I think that's a fantastic example. And so I'll give everybody on this call 2 examples from the Spring context. One is the city of Vancouver itself, actually as an interested and engaged stakeholder in the ecosystem, provides funding to Spring to provide the 5 core workshops for free to the community. In addition to that, we also have had investors, just like Liv, we have had investors who will pay us to help entrepreneurs to be better prepared so that the investor themselves will first be able to save time with the company, and second of all, that the companies will be better prepared. So Liv, I think those are two great examples for who can help to fund these types of workshops. And so the important part from my perspective for everyone, as we're sitting at this moment, is to actually really highlight that these workshops kind of become a program, right? It is a investment readiness program with a series of workshops. And so for us, that's actually why it works. It generally works well for us as incubators and accelerators because we are good at managing projects. We are good at managing programs. And so if we view this as another program, in, where incubation is about, getting people clarity on their problem and getting them to launch, acceleration is unlocking growth and product market fit. And then funding, of course, is helping them to be educated and empowered to raise money at the right time. Then it gives us some confidence to go and pitch that to the right people. In this case, sometimes unique, right? Like maybe it's an investor who's actually helping to fund this as opposed to, say, a donor. So, yeah. Fantastic. Any additional questions on this particular topic before I move on to the next set with its tools? Okay. If there's nothing else, I'll keep going. Don't be shy again to keep popping things into the group chat. So to talk about tools, it is important to note that there's just a set of tools that we can help people with. So checklists for funding, sales process. So when I say sales process, we all go through a sales process, right? So if one of your entrepreneurs is trying to find investors, that is a sales process to investors. If they want to get a grant, it's a sales process to the grant. Ideal investor profile, so who really makes the most sense to work with these pieces. Investor funnel template, pitch template, due diligence framework, monthly update email template. So all just, you know, classic tools that really helps. Yeah, that really helps kind of the process. And so I really think that that is, it's a pretty straightforward piece. And my comment to you is, we personally as Spring, this is not something that we would have standalone funding to do, but it would be a complement to the training, okay? So let's talk a little bit about advisory. And so it's really, really critical to start to build some capability within your program over time to help advise your organizations on should they raise money, yes or no, when is the right time to do so, what options exist for them, and how can they do it successfully. But the important part is that this is very mentor heavy. So for example, having local and global mentors like entrepreneurs who have raised money before or who have secured a specific grant, investors who have invested, accelerators and crowdfunding platforms, also some subject matter experts like lawyers and accountants. Liv actually in chat highlighted that you can also, as a facilitator for some of these training courses and programs, you can also bring in an experienced person on a webinar to do this. So one example that I would give you is there is an impact organization that has offices in both Croatia and Serbia. And we as Spring, we actually, through webinar, we actually delivered their first funding workshops for them so that, you know, they would have confidence that somebody who was experienced could deliver the content. And it was their opportunity to go through the process of seeing how it was delivered. It was a form of training the trainer. But advisory is a really important part in this process because people will have a lot of questions as they go through, no different than an incubator once again. The key with advisory is that advisory is definitely a place where you can get sponsors to come alongside, especially people like lawyers and accountants. Sometimes you will get global accelerators and crowdfunding platforms that can sponsor. We have seen from time to time investors and venture capital firms will also support this. And of course, the last piece is that this is that deeper dive after the workshops. And so, Zareen, to your question earlier, this is often a place where you can get entrepreneurs to start to pay here because they're getting regular advice and support and guidance. So that's kind of a little bit about this particular topic. And maybe I'll just kind of pause here for a second just to see if there's any questions on this particular piece before I continue to move on. Great, so far so good. So what I'll do is I'll just, sorry, didn't mean to do that. I'll just pop on to the next slide. So one way that you can provide this advice, and for those who were in the room in Singapore back in November, we did chat a little bit about this, and that is funding mastermind or roundtables. And funding mastermind or roundtables is actually where you bring together groups of 4 to 8 entrepreneurs meeting on a regular basis. Now, in our context, we usually recommend either bi-weekly or monthly. And the goal in this process is to create a structured, scalable way for your organization to provide ongoing advice for companies raising money. And so it's a nice process. It helps them to track goals, track introductions, to ensure that there's a place where they can ask questions so that those questions can then be answered, whether in the group or after the fact. And of course, the other thing it does is it really creates a sense of community and of authentic sharing. And that's one of the more powerful things about a mastermind is that you really have an opportunity to have entrepreneurs realize that they're not the only people trying to raise money, they're not alone in the process, and that they can learn from other entrepreneurs that are going through it as much as they can learn from yourself or your mentor and investor community. So those are probably, I think, a couple of key things that I wanted to highlight here, and just maybe pause here for a moment to see if there's any questions at all on that. It is important to note, in case anybody has any questions, that this is actually a fantastic way for you guys to make money and fund what you do. And the reason is because funding masterminds or roundtables tend to attract entrepreneurs that are launched in market. They could be alumni of ours, or they could be other great impact organizations that are at a similar stage that, you know, to get this sort of active support to help them raise money is something that is very appealing to them, and is something that will help them to be successful in their fundraising. So I'll use Spring as the case study, and happy to answer any questions. But we currently average 2 groups of 8 entrepreneurs at a time. And the important part in this process is that we really focus on helping them prepare to raise money. So what does it take to raise money? How do I build my materials, like financial statements and business plans and presentation materials, et cetera, to be able to go raise successfully? So we do very, very strong work there. Our net promoter score in the program is incredibly high. It is important to note that probably our companies have about 3 to 4 times the average success rate of companies trying to raise money. It is still a small percentage overall, but the important part is we get them to clarity, because in this process of running a funding mastermind, the companies really identify, actually, you know, am I ready to raise money or not? Do I really want to raise money or not? What is the best type of money for me to raise? So we really help them in the process of getting clarity on where they sit in this process, and that allows them to be successful on an ongoing basis. So just want to share that with you, and see if you guys have any questions on that before I move on. Any questions on funding masterminds or advisory services for companies? Okay, great. I will continue to move on then. And so my next topic here is around introductions. And so with introductions, you know, just straightforward, you know, even in our core incubation acceleration program, we should start to look at making linkages with investors of all types, right? Granting organizations, loan organizations, angel investors, venture capital firms, crowdfunding platforms, whatever is relevant for our companies, we should be actively starting to build that network. And so the goal is just to start asking and looking at who's investing in the ecosystem, start to make, you know, connections, meetings, make sure that you have a database that you track. And the important part as well from our perspectives is we track all the introductions. And the reason we track all the introductions is because it really helps us to get a much greater sense of what funders are actually investing in our businesses or not, who is active and not, and who is a good investor for our ecosystem. So we definitely do this process, which for us has been fantastic. And we really do kind of focus in on providing this as a core service in and around advisory services. So we will do it as a matter of course in incubation and acceleration, but when it comes to funding training, the introductions actually happen once they move past training and either into mastermind or into advisory services. So that's kind of the process that we have seen. So I'm curious, how many of you, and if anybody's willing to share, how do you guys currently handle introductions to investors? And I'd love to get your feedback on how you kind of do that today. So either come off of mute or type it into chat would be great. All right, looks like we have a quiet group today. So, okay, I will keep going. But if you guys have any questions or any comments, definitely continue to raise them when you can. So around funding, and how can you make funding support work for you? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna cover that topic. So some high-level considerations. Funding programs do attract both pre- and post-launch companies. So one of the important side benefits of providing funding training is that it actually does provide deal flow for your core programs. So it can help to attract prospects and leads for your incubator. It can help to attract prospects and leads for acceleration as well. And if you are doing some custom programming, it can do the same. So just know that there is some, in effect, marketing benefit for you to also run some funding programs. The other key piece is that, you know, as you go through this process, good companies attract investors. And if you are going to work in funding programs as a way for you to create your own financial sustainability, we really do want to focus on the companies that are investor ready and not just every company. So what we do at Spring is our workshops are really focused in on the community. So anyone in the community can take a funding workshop, but when we get into funding mastermind and funding advisory services, then we will have a higher threshold to go through on that front. So it is important to note that that is the case. So I'm just going to pause here for a second. The comment in chat, we have introductions to potential investors. We make friends on Facebook, but actually we have not really done customer discovery on the investors. What are the good questions to ask them? That is a fantastic question. Thank you for that. There definitely are some key questions that we want to ask. So the first questions that we like to ask, you know, what industry or industries do they like to invest in? What stage of business? So pre-launch, post-launch. And it is important to note for everyone that that these are questions that I think we find similar between angel investors, venture capital firms, grant organizations, banks and financial institutions. Like, these are common questions that come up. So first, industry and stage. We also ask if there's a theme, for example, like, you know, female founders or women founders would be another great example of where people will have a focus. How do they like to invest? So what I mean by that is, do they invest with loans only? Do they do grants? Do they do investment for equity? Another question that we like to ask is average investment size. So we don't need to have specifics, but we definitely want to have an average. Like, is it $5,000? Is it $50,000? So what is that kind of core component? The other thing that we obviously like to do is we like to find out, like, what kind of success stories do they have to like to share, because it gives us some insight on some example companies that they've invested in. The other question that I like to ask is around the beyond the check question. And so beyond the check basically means, I can invest, and I can invest money, whether it's a loan or a grant or equity. But the question is what would I like to invest beyond the check? Will I, as the investor, will I invest my time? Will I invest my network? Will I invest my industry expertise? So what is that additional investment? But those are kind of the 7 core questions that I like to start off with to really understand an investor, what they're looking for, what works for them, what doesn't work for them, so that we can put the right companies in front of them. So another question from Toru, how often do you see entrepreneurs outsourcing funding, having someone else raise money for them? Are there agencies that do that, and how effective do you think this can be? So that's actually that's a really, really important question, because that tends to have a lot of geographic differences to it. So for example, in North America, in the early process, like first investment round, and I'm speaking now specifically about getting money from investors. In the first investment round, it's very rare, and it would actually be a negative sign in Canada or the United States if you had someone else raising money for you early. Once you're beyond, and you're growing and you're successful and you have a big team, then getting somebody to help at that point in time is actually much more common. And the reason for that is because there is a justification that you can say that you're really busy growing your business and you have a big team of 50 people or 100 people, and so you need someone else to help you. That said, in other parts of the world, I have seen where having the funding process outsourced is acceptable. So for example, in Vietnam, in Ho Chi Minh City, there is an organization, and the acronym is ICM, and ICM does exactly that. So they help companies in Vietnam to raise money, and they do the work for them. The reality is that it can be effective if the organization providing the services has a great investor network and has a lot of experience doing it. So this is, to me, this notion of being hired by an entrepreneur to do all the work to raise money is more of an advanced skill set for an organization. Where I think there is also another alternative is when companies want to hire someone to help them write a grant for a granting organization. And that is a very, very common place for people to outsource. So outsource to have someone identify all of the potential grants they can apply for, outsource the grant writing. That actually is quite common and pervasive out there. So those would be the 2 scenarios. So in investors, kind of get a sense as to what's happening in your country. The experience that I've seen in Southeast Asia, in particular, and including Vietnam, is that it is possible. And then if it's more around things like grant writing or loan application writing, that's much more common. So that's a great question. Thank you for asking.
Keith, it's Liv here. I've just come off mute to also engage with that one. Tashbia, what we also find and what we do is that, like grant writing, there are key moments along the impact investment readiness pathway that even the most engaged founder entrepreneur probably can't do. So detailed financials, valuation, and then the legal side, they're all things that either we provide at TDI or we look for another specialist to do. So I'm not aware of someone who does the whole thing while the founder can look the other way. In Australia, you absolutely, as the founder and the entrepreneur, have to be doing the pitch, have to have a good basic understanding of all the moving parts. But usually there's a team of people that get them ready for that.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds, Liv, like it's very similar to Canada and the US. And what I want all of you to take away from that piece of feedback from Liv is that when it comes to investors, investors often view the first time you raise money as a bit of a milestone moment as a founder and as a company. And so they are looking to the founder to do the pitches and to have an understanding of the process, which is why this funding training is so important. Because if you don't have it, then you will look uneducated in front of an investor, and that's never a good place to be as a founder. So I do agree with that. Liv, thanks for sharing that you guys have chosen to, at least up till now, to outsource some of the skill set. And that is the trade-off decision that we all make. In the case of Spring, over the last 3 years in particular, we've actually brought that skill set in-house with a couple of exceptions. So one is around building a valuation for a company. And then the second one is legal and accounting considerations, where we just partner with law firms and accounting firms. So yeah, so that's great. Yeah, great sharing, Liv. Cool. Awesome. Any other questions before we slide on to the next topic? Great. Keep those questions coming. Those are really, really solid questions. So the impact on revenue. So if you guys remember at the beginning with the reality that all entrepreneurs at some point in time are going to ask the question, do I need to raise money, or make the statement, I need to raise money. It is the classic place where there is an intersection between entrepreneurs as well as donors, sponsors, invested ecosystem players like the ones that Liv mentioned earlier. And so in effect, this process of providing funding support allows us as organizations to sit in the middle. It allows us to be the conduit between funding, sources of funding, and our entrepreneurs. And that provides tremendous value to our entrepreneurs, that we help them to curate the right introductions, that we help them to be empowered with the knowledge and the training to raise money well. And on the other side, it's also really powerful for the funders, because they know that when they are introduced to a company from our organization, that they have been trained, that they're empowered, they're equipped, and they're ready, right? Which is of tremendous value to the funders. And so the important part is that it can have a significant impact on revenue, either through donors, sponsors, and support, or through fees in certain cases. And one thing I do want to highlight on this, to give you guys some context, is that at the start of year 2 as Spring was when we first started to just dip our toes into providing funding support. So we did not do it at all in our first year. And I would say in 2019, at the moment, it's probably going to represent about 25% of our revenue for the entire year will just come from revenue programs. And so it gives you guys a really good sense as to the impact that it can have on our own financial sustainability. And so for us, it has had a profound effect, not only on the entrepreneurs and on the investors or funders, but it's definitely had a positive, very positive and significant impact on Spring financially. And so I just want to share that and maybe just see if you guys have any questions at all on that and revenue and like how we do it, to see if there's any ways that I can answer more questions. So far, so good. I will keep an eye on chat, but I'll keep rolling at the same time. So The final thing that I do want to touch on as it relates to how we can make ourselves financially sustainable by providing funding, training, and support to companies, and that is investment returns. So this is where, as we develop as organizations, we could have the opportunity to actually take a percentage of ownership in a company. Some of you may do this already, but it actually does give us an opportunity for some future return. If you are taking equity, it can sometimes take 7 to 10 years before that return is actually realized. Do know, though, that there are ways to accelerate those returns. So, for example, in Vancouver, there is an organization which is called Radius. Radius is an organization that focuses on healthcare-related companies and incubation and acceleration. They provide some funding support, and in exchange for that, the way that they structure it is that their payback actually comes almost like a version of a loan. And so it's really a nice, seamless way for them as an organization to get their money back, because they don't have to wait for the company to sell. They can get it back through a percentage of revenue. So it's kind of a really nice way to do it. So just know that there are some different ways that you can, kind of speed up your return if you guys do take a piece of ownership in your businesses as a part of funding, training, and support. Any questions on that one? I'm going to give a case study to help. BK Holdings is based here in Hanoi. And they are embedded in what they call Hanoi's leading technical university. Their core focus is helping professors and students to launch new businesses by transferring new technology ideas out of the university and into business. And so as a part of that process, there is some funding that is provided, but they also take a percent of the company. They also take a percentage of whatever money is raised through that kind of corporate process as a training. So they provide the same kind of training or similar. So this is a way that they are able to create financial sustainability for their organization, is to provide that ability to support funding. They take a percentage of the company, and they also take a percentage of the actual investment itself. So that's kind of just a kind of local Asia Pacific example for how somebody helps to drive their own financial sustainability through funding support. Any questions at all on that? All right, so far so good. So I'm actually at the end of the core of this presentation. And so what I would love to do is I would love to just open it up to just open sharing now. So what I would love to see is if anybody has any questions on how you can incorporate funding training into your organization, if it is right for you. And then, of course, we also do have some extra time right now in case you have any questions in general about kind of where you're at for financial sustainability and what is working for you and what is not. So just a time for open sharing and open questions. So who would like to ask a question or make a comment?
Keith, while people are thinking, can I put a question to you that might fit where most people are at this stage of development? So
Great.
Thinking back to our time in Singapore, and also what I've learned about people's businesses as we've done these weekly and fortnightly webinars, I am just, the question I want to ask you that I think might be true for most people is, how do we make a start in this? It's big, it's overwhelming. We can see how it might take 3 to 5 years until we've got a big investor pool, until we've got 2 or 3 successful investments under our belt, until we know and have the skills or have access to the skills to take everyone on the pathway, whether we train them or take them on the pathway more directly, until we've worked out what kind of investment models work in our part of the world. So that's, wow, I can see where we might be at 5 years and 8 years, but what do I do in year 1? Like, just break it down for me a bit. And, I'm thinking how we started at the Difference Incubator was we found an investable enterprise and we did everything for free to learn the ropes, to take them through to investment. And we built it up that way, that every time we took someone through, we charged a bit more for our skills. But we haven't been as creative as you've been at Spring. So that's how we got started. I'm just wondering what advice you'd have for people who are looking at this and going, gosh, where do I start?
So good question. So I'm just starting to type some stuff into the chat. Liv, the example that you gave is actually a fantastic example of how to get started. Work with one company, help them to walk the entire process all the way until the investment is in the bank and in their hands to deploy. And that's a fantastic way to learn. The benefit now, of course, is for everyone being a part of the Frontier Incubators program is it's really a very powerful way to also make sure that you get some external support as you do that. So that is definitely great. The second place that I like to see companies, like organizations like ourselves, to get started is to run a couple of key workshops just to start to sink your teeth into the topic. And so the two main ones that are great places to get started, one is Funding 101. So walking through a process with companies about the different ways that they can raise money for their organization in the local context, help them kind of see the different options that exist, and kind of give them some of that early empowerment and start to see who then kind of lifts out of that process and says, now that I've been through this kind of a workshop, now I think actually I should be raising money, let's have a conversation. The other couple that tie in really nicely are pitch clinics and pitch events or pitch contests. And the reason is because it just starts to give you the opportunity to do a bit of customer discovery on how many companies out there in your ecosystem want to raise money, how many are asking the question. And then use workshops like Funding 101, Pitch Clinic, pitch events as a vehicle to really gauge what the marketplace is looking for. What types of companies are thinking that they're going to raise money, what stage are they at, and use that as sort of a vehicle to start the process. And then I think a third option is to do group advisory. And so I'm going to give the example from Tashbia, where you talked about Toru and you said, hey, listen, we're, actually it was with Zareen. Zareen, I think you were talking about how you had done some feedback with alumni, and some of them were saying that they were interested in getting help raising money, but they felt it should come for free. And so this third option is the variation on Liv's first option, where instead of necessarily working with one company, actually create a peer group of 3 or 4 companies, where those 3 or 4 companies kind of help each other while you help them. So you learn the ropes, but you do it in a group setting, and then you help those organizations, ideally all of them, to raise money, though of course chances are not all of them will, but you'll learn through that process. So those are the top 3 suggestions that I would make. And to give you guys some context, at Spring, what we did is we started with item number 2, which was the very light, kind of 90-minute, 2-hour workshops, Funding 101, pitch clinic, pitch events. And then we did actually a group advisory process with 4 companies. And that's really what kicked us off. So that was kind of our starting point. And what I would say to everybody is, as a part of this process, we do have, at Spring, like we have done extensive work on, as you can tell, on all of the workshops and the other programs. So if you guys are interested in seeing some of this work, more than happy to share some of the presentations that we have used, so you guys can kind of see what the content looks like and how we deliver it, so you can start to, kind of get a better understanding of what is possible. So Liv, I know that was a bit of a long answer, but I just wanted to make sure that I walked through the different options that exist. So the other thing that I would say too is, if anyone is interested, we at Spring do run webinars on a pretty regular basis on these topics, like some of the workshop topics. So if any of you are interested in actually seeing a workshop, in action being delivered, then definitely willing to share either the details of when we're doing it next or a recording of one of our past sessions. So those would be some examples that I would give. Cool. Some other questions, folks? Other ideas? All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slide to the next topic. So next week, Monday, we will have our second seminar. And in that seminar, we will be answering any and all questions that you guys have. So for next week, do come in and really see it as your opportunity to dig in and kind of get the help that you need for those pieces that you need help with. I would highly recommend that you share your financial sustainability canvas. Thanks once again to Will for putting that into Slack, the link for that. So definitely make sure that you attend next Monday's session. It'll be great. And then on Monday, April 29th, we will do our 5th webinar. And that webinar will be focused on co-working space and events. So those are the next 2 upcoming sessions. Any parting questions before we break for the day? All right, fantastic. If you guys have any questions after this webinar, definitely don't hesitate to drop them into Slack anytime. You can always, of course, direct message myself, Liv, or Sana about any specific questions that you have or unique questions to you. But if they're general, please do pop them into Slack. And I definitely appreciate all of you guys taking the time to